Okay, welcome to the Apple Podcast, and this is episode 79, and this is, I guess, July 8th, 2011, and there's a lot of Apple news to discuss this week, so let's get into it. Okay, so one interesting story this week is, Apple had a bad legal decision against it in its lawsuit against Amazon. Now, Apple had sued Amazon to get Amazon to stop using the term App Store in selling Android apps to Android devices through the Amazon website. And I'm not surprised that it didn't get the injunction. And an injunction would basically say, Amazon, you have to stop using that term. And apparently this week, Computer World reported that the district court that was hearing the case, the California court, denied Apple's motion for a preliminary injunction and found that the use of the term App Store in a trademark infringement claim was not worthy enough to grant the preliminary injunction. The court specifically found that Apple has not established that its App Store mark is famous in a sense of being prominent and renowned, and there is also evidence that the term App Store is used by other companies as a descriptive term for a place to obtain software applications for mobile devices. This came from an 18-page order by District Judge Phyllis Hamilton of the United States District Court for the Northern District of California. So that was, I think, Apple's biggest hurdle, that the term sounds too generic. Now, Apple did have substantially exclusive use of the App Store when it launched its service a little over 3 years ago and spent a great deal of money in advertising and publicity, but the term appears to have been used more widely by other companies as time has passed, Judge Hamilton said. So it's unclear if Apple is going to continue with this lawsuit having failed the preliminary injunction. I mean, I found the claim to be kind of a stretch because App Store does sound a little bit generic. App is short for applications, and Store is certainly a generic name. And it's just one of many lawsuits that Apple's involved in, and I just don't know if it was worthwhile for Apple to pursue it. Now, Business Insider had a very interesting article as to why Apple is so dominant with its iPad technology and even its iPhone technology. And I thought it was very insightful because the headline of the article, which came out on the 4th of July, was Apple's exclusive supply chain of advanced technology is literally years ahead of anyone else on the planet. And basically the point of the article was that Apple's using its huge cash hoard. It knows when it goes into a product area, like let's say the iPad, and it knows, let's say when it's coming out with the iPad 2, it knows what components it wants. So Apple can lock up a lot of the components it's going to need by financing. And what it does is let's say there's a factory in China and it knows, it's going to need a new component, let's say screens for iPads. Well, Apple is apparently using its cash hoard to pay for the construction cost or a fraction of it of a new factory, and in exchange gets exclusive rights to output from the production from the factory for a set period of time, and then also builds into it the right for a discounted rate afterwards. And this yields advantages according to the article, and there's two advantages. Let me read the first advantage that Business Insider said there was. The first advantage is that Apple has access to new component technology months or year before its rivals. So this allows it to release groundbreaking products that are actually impossible to duplicate, Business Insider says. And it goes on to say, remember how far up to a year or so after the introduction of the iPhone, none of the would-be iPhone clones could even get a capacitive touchscreen to work as well as the iPhones. And the article says it wasn't just the software. Apple simply had access to new components earlier before anyone else in the world can gain access to it in mass quantities to make a consumer device. The article says that one extraordinary example of this is the aluminum machining technology used to make Apple laptops. This remains a trade secret that Apple continues to have exclusive access to and allows them to make laptops which for now are unsurpassed strength and lightness. So that's a very important point I think they make. The second point they say is that eventually its competitors catch up in component production technology, but by then Apple has their arrangement in place whereby it can source those parts at a lower cost due to the discounted rate they have negotiated with the now most experienced and skilled provider of those parts, who has probably also brought his production costs down too. It goes on to say this discount is also potentially subsidized by its competitors buying those same parts from that provider. The part is now commoditized, so the factory is allowed to produce them for all buyers, but Apple gets special pricing. So this is very clever. So Apple's sort of taking advantage that it's creating new markets. See, if Apple was going into an old market, if let's say there was already a highly saturated tablet market, well, the parts would be already commoditized. But you see, what's clever is Apple knows which direction it's going into, so it goes into some field like tablets, like iPads, and locks up the new technology because nobody else knows about it, and creates this financing deals so that it can get cheaper parts of this great new technology. So I thought it was a very insightful article as to how Apple stays ahead. Okay, so one of the most promising rumors out there that might make a lot of you happy is that there's a rumor that the next iPod Touch will get 3G data connection in the fall. Now, right now, as you know, the iPod Touch is like the iPhone, but with only Wi-Fi. But I think this totally makes sense, and here's why. I think a lot of people are going to want a 3G iPod Touch. And think about it. If you got a 3G iPod Touch, couldn't you wean yourself off the phone carriers? Because let's take my iPhone. My iPhone, I pay for phone service X number of minutes a month, which I share with my wife. So we're on a family plan. Together, for the two phones, we're paying, I think we have a little bit of a discount, but we're paying like $15. We share minutes, and we each have the $30 unlimited data plan. Well, if you think about it, I don't really use my phone a lot. And if I had just a 3G data plan and no phone, I could still use Skype and other voice over IP services to make calls. And wouldn't that bring the price down? Because let's say they didn't offer an unlimited data plan, but one that was, let's say, 3 or 2 gigabytes per month. Well, with that, like on my iPad, I could make voice over IP calls. I could even consider ditching the iPhone if I had a really light, thin iPod Touch with no phone on it. So look, I think this would be huge. You're not locked into a contract, and I think I'm really looking forward to this. Now, this rumor was on 9to5mac.com, and here's what they say. They say Apple advertises its iPod Touch as an iPhone without a phone. And as discussed last night, they might actually merge them. For kids and teens, its primary audience, the iPod Touch is an app store machine that lets them play jaw-dropping games, listen to music, run social apps, to share stuff online and whatnot. Despite these treats and really low $229 price point, the gizmo is seriously lacking in the connectivity department. It works only with wireless hotspots and does not connect to cellular networks. Now a Dutch blog called applespot.nl is running a report this morning which asserts that a 5th generation iPod Touch will contain new antennas and circuitry for 3G data connectivity. So it would be, but apparently it says here that they would exclude voice over IP apps. But I don't know if they could exclude them, because obviously you could probably jailbreak the device and put voice over IP apps. So we'll have to see. It's a fascinating proposition. Okay, so there's been a lot of rumors lately, and One thing that's kind of helpful is that a website called technologizer.com sort of summed up all the crazy rumors that are floating around about Apple. So let's go through what technologizer.com found, Harry McCracken, and let's see what we think of them. Okay, so one rumor is that the iPhone 5 will be a minor upgrade. And the rumor is that, it's going to be announced in August. So I don't think, well, look, Apple doesn't have huge leaps every year in the iPhone, right? Um, they had the 3G and then the 3GS, which was a little faster processor. And then they had the iPhone 4, which had a faster processor and better resolution and thinner design. So look, I think that the next iPhone will have a faster processor because each iPhone has a faster processor. I also think that it'll have a better camera. And the camera might not be better by having more pixels or higher resolution. Rather, Apple might say, look, we found a way to make the camera better in low light or do something special. So they'll find a way. We can't predict how Apple will make the camera better, but I can guarantee you they'll tell you that they did make it better, and in a way maybe that we didn't even predict. So the things that you'll see in the iPhone, and also Apple tends to make the phones thinner and lighter or more sleeker. So I wouldn't be surprised if the iPhone 5 is sleeker. And so anyways, so I don't think it'll be a minor upgrade, but I don't think it'll be a major upgrade. Okay, another rumor that there'll be 15 million Apple iPhone 5s set to ship in September. That there'll be 2 different iPhones in September, and the cheaper one is more important. And then there's a rumor that no cheap iPhone 4S this year. Instead, Apple makes the iPhone 3GS free, says RBC. So what do we think about 2 different iPhones in September? Well, I tend to go with the RBC prediction, which is that they're going to come up with one new model, and then the regular 4 model and then the 3GS model are cheaper. So if they want a cheaper phone, they're not going to make a brand new cheaper phone. They can just take the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 3GS and make that cheaper. So, and as for 15 million Apple iPhones 5 set to ship in September, I think that's feasible because Apple has been continuing to expand the market, and the market can continue to grow, particularly overseas in Europe, in South America, and Africa, in Asia. What another rumor that the iPhone Lite, iPhone 4 Lite, and iPhone 5 will be released by Apple on December 2011. Look, anything's possible. Their usual iPhone update time has been in June. This year they're not doing it. So some people think it's going to happen in September. I personally think it's going to happen in September because September is the big music month. And it would be weird if they didn't have some hardware, because normally they have the iPod Touch, right? Well, how can you come out with a new iPod Touch before a new iPhone? So how can you skip the whole, new hardware with the music event in September? How can you not have a music event in September? The answer is they are going to have a music event in September because iOS 5 is going to come out roughly in early September. Remember, we have this whole iTunes Match thing in the cloud. Well, they're going to probably refine that a bit when they release it, and they're going to have the new iPod Touches come out at the same time. And I bet you the iPhone 5 comes out there because they can't release the iPod Touch, the new one, before the iPhone 5. Okay, another rumor, according to McCracken, is a rumor that there'll be a 7-inch iPad minis with a Retina display coming next year. I think that does make sense. I think Steve Jobs famously laughed at the size of the Kindle and any tablet that's under the current size of the iPad, which is close to almost 10 inches. But the reality is, Steve Jobs probably sees that there's lots of people buying the Kindle and similar e-reading devices. And they're buying them because they're somewhere between the portability of the iPhone and the iPad. And so I think there is room for a 7-inch iPad mini. The real challenge, and I've previously discussed this in a post, is pricing. Because where would you price the 7-inch iPad? Already, the bottom level 10-inch iPad is $499, and the current iPod Touches, which are 3.5-inch, essentially, tablets, are in close to $300. So where are you going to squeeze in the price of the 7-inch iPad minis? So I think that's the challenge for Apple. Another rumor is that the iPad 3 is going to have a Retina display. Well, it's very possible that Apple will upgrade the iPad. So, these are some of the rumors, and some of them I think are going to happen, and some are not going to happen. Okay, so another rumor that's making its way around is July 8th comes from electronista.com. And the rumor is that Apple is testing 1080p iTunes High Definition Plus movies to be released in September. And according to the article, a source revealed Friday that Apple is looking to test movies in 1080p. Now, the current, iTunes movies for high definition are 720p. And, we'll get into, is that enough later? But Apple, I guess, is considering having true high definition, which are 1080p, and then selling, according to this story, an Apple TV that can handle 1080p. The current Apple TV, which is the second generation Apple TV, costs $99, and it can only show high definition in 720p. And I guess the current Apple TV has a A4 processor. And according to this article, the new Apple TV will have a better, more powerful dual-core processor, the A5, which is in the iPad. And I think this totally makes sense. Apple seems to be introducing the better chips for its mobile devices into its iPad. Now, the article says that Apple's been holding off on 1080p video, which it can deliver now, because it's worried that customers don't really have that fast a connection to the internet and bandwidth. So the article suggests that Apple would not stream the 1080p movies, but offer it as a download. So that way you could download it at your own pace, and then when it's downloaded, you could, watch it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy with the 720p content on the Apple TV now. I think that's fine. Frankly, the quality that I get from Netflix is fine for streaming. I've got a big TV, and, I do think we're going to see an update to the Apple TV. I think the Apple TV is selling well. Hopefully in the next quarterly announcement from Apple, we'll get a sense of how many Apple TVs it's sold. The Apple TV, the $99 Apple TV, is actually now an accessory to the iPad because it allows this wireless mirroring between the iPad and the Apple TV. So I've said in the other shows that I do that I think Apple should make the Apple TV smaller. It's already pretty small. It looks like a hockey puck. But if they can cram a Wi-Fi network into there too, that would be a huge plus. Because then, they could sell it as this is your Wi-Fi router, but it's also your internet TV connection. And also then when you're using it for business purposes with your iPad, you don't have to bring another router along when you want to make a presentation. So I think this story is particularly credible. Okay, if you're an Apple investor, you might be a little worried by the next story, which was in Cult of Mac today, July 8th. There's a story that is about Apple's iAd, Now, iAd, if you recall last year, is Apple's effort to itself sell ads on its iOS devices. And it offers people to take out ads that Apple will work with developers. It offers an API so that developers can put the iAd service that Apple offers into an app, and then Apple would sell the advertising. Well, according to this Cult of Mac story, Apple has priced itself out of the potential $2.5 billion mobile ad market. And according to Cult of Mac, top name advertisers have been fleeing iAd because Apple is charging too much money for the ads. And as a result, Apple has now cutting the price up to 70%. So, the article says, quote, is iAd in free fall? And it goes on to say that some of the most recognizable brands that started with iAd when it launched a year ago, such as Citigroup and JCPenney, have left for competing ad platforms such as Google's AdMob and Millennial Media, according to Bloomberg. And as a result, the iPhone and iPad makers now offering ad packages once selling for $1 million for as little as $300,000. So, my thoughts on this are that Apple sometimes miscues in going into new service markets. Apple actually does very well with hardware, offering new hardware products like the iPhone, the iPad, the the iDevices. But think about it, when it comes to services, MobileMe, for example, never really took off as a mass market internet service. Similarly, Ping, the social network on the iTunes, never really took off. And Apple, with much fanfare, went into the Google's territory of advertising. And I think they, miscued by being a little greedy and charging way too much. So I find this story believable. I think Apple needs to really make it attractive to come in here and offer deals to people. So, it's interesting if Apple will discuss this issue at the next quarterly results meeting, which is coming out soon in July, because their fiscal quarter ended in June, end of June of this year. Okay, so next week should be a big week for Apple because I think the rumors are pretty true that next week Apple is going to release Lion, the next operating system for the Macintosh, to everybody. Right now, it's in beta. It's an actual gold master form, so people who are in the developers program have Lion. And Lion's going to be released, according to rumors. Cult of Mac has a rumor, but it's picked up by most of the people online. But also, supposedly, there's going to be new hardware. And the rumor is that Apple retail stores are being told that they're going to have staff sleepovers on July 13th, which is a Wednesday. And so that means that on Thursday, July 14th, which is also Bastille Day, a French holiday, Apple could make major announcements and allowing Lion to be downloaded. Remember, Lion is going to be only released as a software download. But there's also rumors that the MacBook Air, the new ones, are going to be upgraded and are going to come out then. So Cult of Mac says that the rumor is that the new MacBook Airs are going to have the faster Sandy Bridge processors in them, and that they're also going to have 400 megabytes per second SSD drives. So that would be really cool because I think it would make it really a fast device. Now, there could be other hardware updates because, the MacBook Air most likely is going to have this new technology, the Thunderbolt cable that's currently in the MacBook Pros and the iMacs. But the other Macs need the Thunderbolt cable, and so the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro, as well as the MacBook Air, will get them. So my sense is that the MacBook Air will come out by itself because it's now one of the most significant products that Apple sells. Apple sells more iOS devices than Macs, and of the Macs it sells, the MacBook Airs I think are the biggest seller, followed by the MacBook Pros, followed by the iMacs, followed by, I guess, the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro. So, it's going to be exciting. I mean, I've been playing around. I've got the Gold Master Lion, and I've got the beta, and I can't really talk about it because I signed a non-disclosure agreement, but I don't think you'll be disappointed. I think the next version of the operating system is going to be very touchpad centric. So if you have a Mac that doesn't have a touchpad, which would mean you have to have a desktop Mac, because all MacBook Pros and Mac Airs have touchpads, you really should get the Magic Trackpad, because I like it even with Snow Leopard, the Magic Trackpad on the Mac, and it really works well with Lion. So next week, we should see these updates. So if you're in the market for a MacBook Air, do not get it now. Wait, because a release is imminent. And I think it's going to be a really beautiful device. Okay, so if you are into sort of web apps and have a Mac, you might want to check out an app on the Mac that helps you make your own web apps for the Mac. And there's a free version of it. It's called Fluid, Fluid, at fluidapp.com. So Fluid basically lets you create a real Mac app out of any website or web application, effectively turning your favorite web apps into OS X desktop apps. So basically, you enter a website's URL, provide a name, and choose an icon, and click Create. And within seconds, you have a chosen website, has a permanent home, according to the website, on your Mac as a real Mac application that appears in your dock. So Fluid is free, but you can download Fluid for free and create as many Fluid apps as you like. However, for $4.99, you can purchase a Fluid license, which unlocks a few extra features. You can, with the extra, with the $5 fee, you can create Fluid apps with separate cookie storages. So you can have preference security cookie storage. You can pin a Fluid apps to the Mac OS X status bar. You can use user scripts or user styles in your Fluid apps. And when you get Lion, you can use Lion full screen mode in your Fluid app. So it's a very cool app. So let's try it out. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, so I'm unzipping the Fluid app, and here it is. Let's launch it, and let's see what happens. So here we go. Create a Fluid app. Let's go up to my website. Let's go up to. Hold on. Let's go back to the Fluid app. Let's go to the Max Future website, www.maxfuture.com, and we'll call it Future TU, maxfuture.com. We'll call it MF, and use website favicon. Let's create it. So here we go. maxfuture.com. It's creating it. Success. Create Fluid app. Reveal in Finder. So let's see what it looks like. It's going to reveal it in Finder. So this is exciting. Okay, there it is down here, the Max Future app. So I launch it. And here it is. Here is the app, Max Future. And so there we go. We got a Essentially, it's essentially just like a browser with no URL or anything like that. So you can just see the website. But I guess if you had some sort of interactive website, this would help you create a Mac app. So it's you might want to download it. It's like a cool free application. If you feel like you want the additional features, you pay the $5 and upgrade. Okay, so now I have to give credit to gigaohm.com because they alerted me to this Fluid app in their article, and they have a very helpful article if you are into Google+. Now, Google+ is the new social networking service that Google rolled out last week, and right now it's just a project, and it's not in field testing, so it's not open to everybody. But I, Lex, got into it by the a kindness of a stranger. I just basically started emailing people who were in, and somebody was kind enough to send me an invite, and I got in while Google was still allowing people in. Anyways, Google Plus, I highly recommend it because I think it's better than Facebook. It's sort of like a mixture of Twitter, Facebook, and what else? Email, I guess. But anyways, Google Plus, if you're into it or you plan to be into it, GigaOhm has some good advice on how to get the most out of Google Plus on your Mac or iOS devices. So they basically said you can create a Google Plus Mac app with Fluid. And so they basically point out that it's going to be great also when Lion comes out because Fluid allows you to turn it into a big, full screen mode. The other thing is that you can now have better interaction with bookmarklets and extensions. You can change how Google Plus looks and how it behaves according to this article with custom extensions for Chrome and other browsers. So they suggest that you go to something called Go to Web 20, that's GO2WEBTO, and where there's a great list of some of the best tools out there for interaction with bookmarks and extensions. And it says that one of the best is a Plus extension that lets you save any web page you come across to your one list in Google+. But that specific link on the Go to Web 20 site is currently broken, so they say check out a similar option for the Chrome Web Store instead. And then it goes on to say if you're not using Chrome, you can grab this bookmarklet for +1 recommendations that should work with most other browsers. And let's see, the bookmarket that they suggest there is from labnol.org, labnol.org, and it's a Google +1 bookmarklet that's available for all websites and blogs across the internet. So, if you're into Google Plus, you want to check out this story by gigaohm.com that came out also today, July 8th, by Daryl Etherington. Now, it also says if you want to get the most out of Google Plus on your Mac, import your iPhoto albums with Picasa for Mac, because Picasa, which is Google's photo album on the internet, has an application on the Mac, and basically if you have photos in Picasso, then you can also have them built into Google+. So, basically it says Apple has built Facebook support into iPhoto, but there's no direct method for getting content to Google+. But if you have the Picasa's free native Mac app, you can import your iPhoto content and share it to your Picasa web albums right from your desktop. Now, a long time ago, I did use that Picasa native Mac app, and it would quickly just scan and use your iPhoto library. You didn't have to create like a new one if you didn't want to. So that's pretty helpful, and that's a good tip. For iOS devices, it says you can use third-party Picasa apps to upload your photos, and it goes on to say there's no instant upload for iPhones and iPads as there is for Android devices, but you can get your photos
from your mobile to your Google Plus account without having to upload to a computer first. And the article says you have to get one of the available iOS Picasa photo uploading tools, like something called Web Albums. So I've never done that, but that's a very good tip, particularly if you're one of the few people in Google Plus who really wants to use it for photo sharing. And then on iOS devices, for bookmarklets for sharing, the one that he mentioned earlier also works on iOS devices. And then you can also, according to this article, share from desktop to mobile. It says you can use Google Plus as a handy way to quickly share links between your desktop and mobile devices by adding an email address that you have registered on your smartphone to one of your sharing circles on Google Plus. So, for instance, you could create an iPhone reading list and reshare interesting links in your Google Stream to a specific circle called For iPhone that just contains your own email address, or you could set up a circle with the email address of your coworkers or project team for easy forwarding of interesting links and notes. Now, let me explain. If you're not in Google Plus, one of the highlights of Google Plus is that you have default circles, and then you can create circles, and you can call these circles anything you want, and it's built into the browser, right? So the beauty of circles is you can just drag contacts or people you're interested in into a circle, and then the beauty is when you want to like post something or share something, you can quickly choose which circle you want to share it with, or if you want to share it with many circles or with everybody who's, publicly. So some people are finding creative ways to use the circles on Google Plus. They are, for example, creating like a circle and calling it Read Later, and then they're sharing stories that they're finding on Google Plus with their Read Later circle, which is essentially themselves. So you don't have to share it with people. You can create, sharing with yourself. And so what this article is saying is that it's suggesting that you have like a circle that's your iPhone, and that way the stories will go to your iPhone email, through the circle. Now, it also points out that Google Plus is soon going to have, if Apple approves it, a Google Plus iOS app. So that should be coming out soon, and I'll sort of, let you know if I get it, how well it works with my account. Okay, so if you want to see what Google Plus looks like, if you're watching the video version of this podcast, I'm logged into my Google Plus account, and there, it's Lex. And if you look up here in the corner, let's see, up here it says Lex Plus. That's next to my Gmail account. And basically, if you look at the top here, this is the stream. So the people I'm following Sarah Lane from the Twit TV network, and other people like MG Siegler from TechCrunch, and Vic Condatora is the Google executive overseeing Google Plus, Leo Laporte. So there's a lot of tech people in here, and so you've got the stream. This looks like Facebook, right? And then you have photos. I don't really have many photos. So here I'm seeing photos from my circles that I'm following. And then here's my profile. This is just my stuff, the stuff that I've posted. And then there's the circles. So here are the circles. And these are the people I'm following. So you could see I only have 5 people so far who've gotten in. I've got an invite circle, I've got a following circle, an acquaintance circle, a test circle, but you can create your own circles, and basically it's easy to just drag people in here. So these are the people who are in my circle, but I could just drag her in there. Let's say I could drag her under acquaintances here. I don't really know Justine, but I could drag her, and if I wanted to get her out of that circle, I drag her out and she disappears. So this is all web-based. And so maybe web apps do have a future because this website is very slick. It almost feels like an app because I'm actually using my touchpad here. And look, there's no pointer. There's like a hand. It's almost like you're grabbing it, like like you're touching it on the iPad. So that's the key to Google Plus. Then you have streams. Streams are the based on the different circles that I'm following. Incoming is a stream of just everybody joining Google Plus. So you could just see, all the people coming in. Notifications are notifications, I guess, from people to me, and then Sparks. So Sparks are essentially like news stories. So, for example, I created these Sparks: Macintosh, iPhone, Apple, iPad. So when I click Macintosh, it's essentially like a Google News feed. So there are these just sort of random stories that I guess are pulled from the internet based on Macintosh. I can click iPhone, and here are some iPhone stories. Apple to bring out a cheap and high-end iPhone. So I don't know if this is better than Google News, and I'm not sure what algorithms they're using to to cull it. And anyways, you also have the ability to chat. Over here, there's a button for chatting, and you have the ability to do what do you call it? Huddle. And Huddle is, let's click over here. See here, I'm sorry, not the Huddle. You can create a Hangout. So if you click here, start a Hangout, you can start a multi-person, up to 10-person video chat. So I haven't really done that yet, but I've read great reports that it really works well. So, that's an overview of Google Plus. And if you're into the Mac, there's a lot of Mac people and Apple people in Google Plus. Okay, so one area where Apple could, make inroads is clearly the enterprise and business. And I've been sort of harping on this for a long time because since time immemorial, I've been using Windows at work, and since time immemorial, I've been using Apple's products at home. So I've always had a Macintosh at home. I've never had a Windows computer at home. And I've never had a Macintosh at work, and I've always had a Windows computer at work. And it just baffles me why Apple, well, it doesn't baffle me. I know why Apple hasn't been able in the past to make inroads in the enterprise, and the enterprise being defined as business, big business, government, etc. And the reason is because Microsoft, Windows, and Intel got a sort of a monopoly in the big business area back in the early days of personal computers in the 1980s. And I know a lot of people like to blame Apple and say that the reason is that Apple wouldn't open up its platform and allow the licensing of its operating system. Well, that's partly true. I think the main reason, and I keep going back to this, is that Microsoft rode into the enterprise on the tails of IBM. People totally forget that, going into the 1980s for decades, IBM supplied old products, equipment, typewriters, mainframe computers, you name it, to enterprise and to the government. In fact, IBM was the subject of a massive antitrust suit by the United States government in the 1970s. That was like one of the biggest antitrust cases. So IBM, remember, Microsoft then gets sued by antitrust violations by the Justice Department in the 90s, but by then IBM had become sort of, weakened. So the reason Apple lagged is because when Apple came out, nobody really knew Apple. They thought it was a toy, and big business and enterprise didn't trust Apple but trusted IBM. And it was IBM that got PCs into the big business market because their salesmen who were selling already typewriters and mainframe computers could basically go to the customer and say, hey, we've got these cool PCs and they're backed by IBM and we'll service them. Because anybody who works in the enterprise, whether it's government position or a big Fortune 500 company or any company, knows that people who buy equipment are nervous, and they're nervous about support and service. And IBM, which had this history of servicing equipment and supplying equipment, could assure people that the PC would be served. And remember, IBM went out and found this little company, Microsoft, that supplied the operating system. And that's how Microsoft got into the enterprise. And then once Microsoft was in the enterprise on IBM's coattails, Microsoft pointed out that it controlled the license for the operating system, controlled the operating system, MS-DOS, and basically freely licensed it to people who were able to reverse engineer IBM's PC. And the people who reverse engineered the hardware to the IBM's PC went to the enterprise customers and said, hey, we can undercut the hardware that IBM is selling the PCs. And don't worry, you can run the exact same programs on our PC clones because Microsoft is going to license the operating system. So, so who lost out in the end? IBM, because there was a zillion companies like Dell and HP and Gateway and all sorts of companies making clones of the IBM PC, but there was only one operating system because what people cared about was the software. Anyways, let's fast forward. We're decades ahead, and Apple has surged to massive size, not on the heels of the Macintosh, but initially on the heels of the iPod. The iPod was the Trojan horse into the Windows world because the iPod, was the first Apple device that a lot of PC people or Windows people were ever exposed to, because they might not have bought a Macintosh, but certainly in this past decade, people on Windows PC wanted a music player, and the only music player to have was, or is the iPod. And so you remember the iPod became compatible with Windows computers, and iTunes became something that was on Windows as well as the Mac. So that's how Apple sort of got the foot in the door in Windows computing. And then of course the iPhone. There's a lot of people with Windows computers who have iPhones. And now the iPad. There's got to be a lot of people with Windows computers who have iPads. So Apple is now poised to really penetrate the enterprise market because the iPad and the iPhone are devices that many people who still have Windows computers at work want. And there's a lot of people, a lot of executives and everyday people who are bugging their IT people saying, why do we have to have these crappy Blackberries? Why can't we have an iPhone or an Android? And so Apple has to make a pitch to the business crowd that the iPhone and the iDevices are business compatible. And according to, this is actually a very long-winded statement by me, but according to MacNN.com, there's a print ad now out by Apple entitled Business Savvy. And the article basically points out that in the print ad, which is, I guess, running in the full page ad is running in the latest issue of The Economist. And basically, the ad highlights that there are business-savvy apps on the iPhone, like The Economist app, the Bloomberg app, the Oracle Business Indicators app, the Cisco's WebEx app. And at the bottom, the ad touts the company's own mobile version of the iWork suite, and mentioning that the low price of just $10 per ad And the ad then says, quote, with over 425,000 apps, the best phone for apps just keeps getting better, end quote. So, I do think Apple wants to get into the business area, and it has to really plow forward. Honestly, I think, one thing that it has to do is comfort people that you can work with and edit Microsoft Office documents on an iPhone and iPad. It can be done, but I think a lot of people in big business who are not familiar with iDevices will, and hear the word Apple, I think a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's not compatible. It's not compatible with our Windows computers. And that misconception has to be destroyed, because the reality is you can open like a Microsoft Office Word document in Pages for both the iPhone and Pages for the iPad. And you can, I guess you can open Excel documents and numbers on the iPad. So I think that's going to be key. That, and plus the security. Apple has a lot of security in the iPhone and the iPad, and Apple has to convince IT and executives in the enterprise that their devices, the iPhone and the iPad, are very secure. So we'll have to see. According to this article at the last quarterly report, Tim Cook was quoted as saying that 88% of the Fortune 500 companies are deploying or testing the iPhone, and 75% doing the same with the iPad. Well, what does that mean? Testing could mean a few people are using it. Deploying really is like what percentage of the people in the Fortune 500 are getting the iPhone or iPad. So that's clearly something we should be, hankering for if we're in an enterprise setting. Okay, so if you're one of the few people who were saying, oh, look, AT&T's not so bad, and, Verizon's not so great, at the time that everybody was jumping up and down for joy that Verizon now had the iPhone, well, you might get the last laugh, because it looks like Verizon's pulling a fast one on anybody who's got or is going to get an iPhone on the Verizon network. Because remember, when Verizon started selling the iPhone, it was sort of touting that you could get unlimited data plans, and AT&T had stopped offering unlimited data plans. Well, Verizon is now saying that it's no longer going to open accounts with unlimited data plans, and instead it's going to have tiered pricing for data. And here are the data packages, and they're kind of disturbing. And I'm still on AT&T, and I've got an unlimited data plan for $30 a month, and I'm going to keep it as long as I can. But Verizon's new pricing for the data plans are, listen to this, for $10 a month, you get a mere 75 megabyte allowance. Now that's a joke, because 75 megabytes will go in an instant if you have internet connection. And then up from there, it jumps all the way to $30 a month for 2 gigabyte allowance. Now that's more expensive than AT&T. AT&T gives you 2 gigabytes per month for $25, so that's $5 more. But one thing that's good is that they only charge $10 per gigabyte if you go over the plan. AT&T charges a lot more if you go over. So, if you're just going to stick to a 2 gigabyte plan, the AT&T plan is $5 cheaper. But, this is a clear sign that the days of sort of unlimited internet on cell phones have come to an end. And that's a pity, because I don't think there should be any limit. I think that, there should just be a plan with unlimited data. Now, speaking of the iPhone and Verizon, 9to5Mac.com has an interesting story. It's really reporting on a report from an analytics company called Localytics, which published a report on July 7th regarding the Verizon iPhone. And basically, it says that, Verizon claims to have almost a third of all U.S. iPhone 4s. So that's pretty significant if you think about it, because Verizon didn't start selling iPhone 4s until the beginning of this year in January, while AT&T has been selling iPhone 4s since last June. So AT&T had an 8-month head start. So, that's significant, but it could change because, as I pointed out, and as this article points out, Verizon is no longer going to have the unlimited data plan. And for new customers, Verizon in January was the only source for unlimited data on the iPhone because AT&T had stopped that. So now that Verizon's plans are kind of pricey, maybe their sort of fast adoption rate will slow down now that AT&T's pricing is sort of on a level playing field with Verizon. So it's interesting how quickly Verizon picked up the share of the iPhone market in the US. Okay, so if you're in the market for a mini DisplayPort to HDMI cable, you better hurry up and get it. And here's why. Well, first of all, what are mini DisplayPort to HDMI cables? Well, as many of you know, the Macs all have mini display ports, which are a way to connect to external monitors. And eventually we're going to just pure Thunderbolt, but right now that's the main way you connect out. But the problem is a lot of TV sets and a lot of monitors, they don't have mini DisplayPort inputs. They have instead something that's kind of standard among TVs now, flat panel TVs, called HDMI. So what you need to do is get a cable that has mini DisplayPort on one end and an HDMI connection at the end. Well, the problem is, it turns out there's an organization that licenses the HDMI standard called HDMI.org. One story that I'm reading from TUAW.com, dated today, July 8th, says that they're demanding that mini DisplayPort to HDMI cables be taken off the market because they're unlicensed. And this story is quoting TechRadar, says that the cables fall afoul of HDMI licensing standards, which state that any cable with a male HDMI connector at one end must also have a male HDMI connector at the other end, and anything else doesn't meet the standards and therefore cannot be sold. So, it's interesting because I have an HDMI to DVI connector that I got from Monocable or Monoprice. So, you might want to rush and get your HDMI to mini DisplayPort cable. Now, one workaround is you get an HDMI cable with HDMI on both ends, and then you get like a mini DisplayPort adapter plug that you put on the end. And these adapters are okay under the HDMI standards. So you just can't have a cable that has one end be HDMI and one end mini DisplayPort. So that's too bad. And according to this article, Monoprice has already withdrawn these unlicensed cables, and that's quite a pity. So I don't know. HDMI.org, boo-hoo. I think what you're doing is kind of not nice. Okay, so the final story to talk about this July 8th is really both silly, stupid, and sad. And this was widely reported, but I'm reading about it in PCMag.com. And basically, Apple has started a Secret Service investigation of a Brooklyn-based artist because apparently what this Brooklyn-based artist was doing was going into an Apple store and, without the permission of Apple, installing software that I guess he developed to secretly take webcam photos every 2 minutes of customers looking at the Macintoshes, and then secretly having that program send those images to the internet, where they were posted on his Tumblr blog. And he had a Tumblr blog called People Staring at Computers. So apparently this Brooklyn-based artist, his name is Kyle McDonald, and he apparently tweeted that the Secret Service just stopped by to investigate him, and they took his laptop, and it looks like they're going to investigate him. Well, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't arrested, because you can't go, Apple has private property, right? And you can't go in and install spyware and secretly take pictures of people when they're looking into a Macintosh. Now, let me click here. This is his blog called People Staring at Computers.tumblr.com. And it's kind of silly. I understand he thinks this is art, but all it is people looking at the computer. I'm surprised it's still up on Tumblr. But again, I don't know if this is stupid, if it's amusing. The reason Apple probably called the Secret Service is Apple probably doesn't want people installing software on its computer stores. It's just, what if somebody puts in malicious programs that start automatically showing porn or something in the stores? It could really destroy, or harm their business. Like, the Apple's Fifth Avenue store is massively popular. Well, what if another artist decided, okay, for their art, they're going to install a program that just puts like child porn up or something like that? See, it's just, you can't go in and, go into private property and just start installing whatever you want. Anyways, so I thought that's one of the more funny or strange stories of the week. So thanks for listening to the Apple Podcast by Lex at maxfuture.com. And please don't hesitate to put in a positive word on the iTunes store. Anything you put in there will help this commercial-free, chit-chat-free podcast. Thanks for listening.